Hello and welcome back. In our last meeting, we discussed the role that ideologies play within the modern political sphere. We're now going to move to the modernization of economic life as we examine the Industrial Revolution and its impact on societies in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, starting with the birth of the factory and the advent of the machine age, which signals a radical shift from agriculture to industry. Let's begin by describing industrialization in its historical context. It commences with the development of the factory system starting in the mid-1700s and is marked by a transformation from an agricultural economy based on human or animal labor into an economy based on the mass production of goods in mechanized factories, often using primitive assembly line techniques. From a geographical perspective, industrialization began in Britain. But why? What conditions might help us explain why Britain gave birth to modern industrialization? To answer this question, let's start with the political stability that the English achieved by the end of the 17th century with their parliamentary monarchy. There were also economic innovations that appeared at this time, such as the establishment of the Bank of England, one of the first national banks, which had the capacity for the large-scale lending that was necessary for industrialization. There were abundant local concentrations of key resources as well, particularly coal and iron ore, which are the building blocks of a modern industrial economy. There was also the moderate British climate, never terribly hot, nor terribly cold. This was important for a transportation infrastructure that initially depended on the construction and maintenance of canals, which seldom froze. The British also enjoyed extensive trade relations with Asia, India, and America that generated significant wealth, which became the financial basis for the investments that were needed for industrialization. Capital accumulation is the key to the ability to industrialize, because building factories is very, very expensive. But once completed, the factories bestow numerous advantages. First, in Britain, they allowed the concentration of materials and labor under one roof, reducing transportation costs and increasing worker productivity. Second, the use of machines enabled the standardization of products, thereby improving quality and consistency. Third, the machines eliminated the need for specialized workers, thereby cutting down training time and expanding the labor market to include workers who might otherwise be considered marginal. Finally, factories cut down production time, ensuring reliable deliveries to far-flung markets. Mechanization brought considerable wealth to those who had the capital to invest in building and operating factories. The owners used their newly won riches to influence politics and legislation, challenging the more traditional titled and landed gentry for power and influence. But all was not well on the factory floor. Workers endured harsh conditions in the plants, which were constructed with little concern for employee safety. They were subjected to squalid, often dehumanizing working conditions. The factories were dirty, hot, unventilated, with workdays stretching from 12 to 16 hours, 6 days a week. Living conditions in crowded and overpriced housing were scarcely better, as workers were exposed to both water and air pollution in their homes. Outbreaks of disease, including tuberculosis and cholera, were frequent and could quickly sicken the population. All of these elements contributed to a very bleak existence for factory workers. In the early mid to 19th century, the average life expectancy of an industrial worker in the manufacturing city of Manchester was less than 25 years, about half of that of a rural villager. Industrialization thus gave rise to two separate and very unequal classes. While the bourgeoisie enjoyed all the comforts their wealth could afford, factory workers suffered appallingly. This social dichotomy led many intellectuals of the era to ask whether industrialization was a benefit or a plague. Should the gains of mechanization be considered progress if they lead to such physical misery and even death? This was the issue that spawned the two main ideologies that emerged in the 19th century, capitalism and socialism. The central spokesmen for these conflicting ideologies were Adam Smith, the godfather of economic liberalism, or capitalism as we know it today, and Karl Marx, the main ideologue of revolutionary socialism. In 1776, Smith, a Scottish economist, wrote The Wealth of Nations, which analyzed the economic processes involved in production and exchange, and, in doing so, effectively created a handbook for aspiring capitalists. Among its tenets was the maxim that the value of a good can be equated to the effort, or work, needed to produce that good, now known as the labor theory of value. This contrasted with the traditional notion that value stemmed from either ownership of land or from some precious metal such as gold or silver. According to Smith, the fruits of labor, the wealth itself, can be distributed in a variety of ways, but it's the labor that creates the wealth. Another principle which Smith posited was the division of labor, whereby work can be split into short, simplified sub-processes, resulting in enhanced factory productivity and increased profits. A third concept that Smith advocated was free trade, the notion that exchange between states should be as unrestricted as possible, as opposed to protectionism, where tariffs are used to shelter domestic industries from cheaper, or better, products imported from other countries. A fourth principle proposed by Smith was laissez-faire, a French term which can be roughly translated as leave it alone. It's essentially a market policy of non-intervention that minimizes the role of the state in the economy. The doctrine of laissez-faire leads to the last principle of Smith's economic liberalism, which he called the invisible hand, a metaphor for the self-regulating forces of supply and demand, which produce the socially desirable effect of better goods at a cheaper price without anyone consciously engineering this result.